The Enchantress hovered behind the eldritch object as it orbited the tainted star, unnatural energies scathing against her shields as she completed her final scans of the mysterious vault. Shield integrity at 66% and falling. The acolyte manning the tactical station interrupted the master's reverie. "We can't stay here much longer." "We can stay long enough to watch history unfold," Sia replied. "Have faith, and all will be revealed. The sleeper shall awaken soon, and we will be the first to greet a glorious new reign." As if in response to the seer's words, the object before them began to glow, changing shape and growing closer as it did. The look of rapture on the prophet's face did not falter even as the warning klaxons began to sound, and every indicator light on the bridge blinked an angry red. Hello, and welcome to The Bad Spot, an actual play podcast where I, Matt Risby, and I alone, am playing through Ironsworn Starforged. This week's Tale from the Drift was from Shawn Morain, who turned in a wonderfully eerie and atmospheric piece for us to enjoy, and I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to him for taking the time to do so. If you want to roll some dice and write something for me to read at the beginning of a future episode, then the submission guidelines and contact details are on screen now. And whilst I have you, why don't you leave a like, subscribe, and click the little bell icon so you can follow along with the campaign each and every week. These things are really important for supporting the channel and supporting what I do, and if you really want to support the channel, then why not check out the Bad Spot Patreon? There you'll get early access to all episodes, exclusive monthly behind the scenes videos, and your name on screen like these lovely people. Last time out, Archer and the crew of the Eclipse rematerialize, having used the vault as an iron gate, destroying it in the process. They re-emerge, however, somewhere else in the spine, much to the crew's despair. This quickly turns to hope when scans show they are very nearly across the stretch of perilous wild space completely, just one more jump from arriving in the Delphian Flux, the sector they must reach to return to the remainder of Cole's crew. As they prepare to jump into the drift one last time, the clouds of dust obscure the fact that they are in an abandoned minefield, and they trigger a chain reaction of explosions as they jump. The Eclipse, which took significant damage as the vault exploded, is further damaged by the blast, almost coming apart completely under the strain of travelling through the drift. However, they finally drop into space beyond the dust. They have done what no one else has done outside of wide-eyed spacer's tales. They have successfully crossed the spine of Kronos. In urgent need of repairs, they are relieved to find a battered and barely functioning deep space station called Purgatory. Largely unpopulated save for a few dozen grubs and spacers, they discover a safe haven of sorts, but what this place's real purpose is remains to be seen. So, a lot has happened, and even though I haven't played the game for a couple of weeks, I kind of feel like I have because of the live stream that I did, where some of you lovely people helped me build the sector in which we find ourselves, the Delphian Flux. Now, if you haven't checked out that live stream, please do, although if you want everything coming up in this sector to be a surprise, then it's also totally cool to sit that one out and enjoy the ride. Now, I really loved live streaming and getting instant feedback from folks in the chat, and it was really heartening to have so many people stop by and help by chucking out prompts and kind of being there to let me bounce ideas off you all. In short, I had a very, very good time, and I would love to do it again. What I do, I actually have no idea, but the seed has definitely been planted. If anyone has any ideas of any live streams they'd like to see in the future, then why don't you let me know in the comments below, and maybe, just maybe, your dreams will come true. Anyway, that is a side note. The main point is that in that live stream, we built the bones of this sector. We kind of started putting it together kind of as a sketch. Now, my plan was to build the entire sector on stream, like the whole thing, kind of flesh out all the details and everything. But as it turns out, you know, in the 2 hours that we were live for, we really only had enough time to do 2 settlements and kind of 2 factions. One of those was kind of very, very kind of loosely sketched, which is fine because there was actually a ton of great ideas, which has kind of sent the wheels spinning in motion and has left plenty of literal and figurative space to explore. Now, some of those ideas I have kind of let percolate since doing the stream, and I have developed some of those ideas in slightly different directions, and I can't wait for it all to unfold and to share it with you over the next who knows how many sessions. But first, we have the business of this week's episode to attend to. And I think the first point of order is a little bit of campaign housekeeping and to check in on some of the progress tracks we've got running, some of the vows we've got running, and maybe, just maybe, reach a milestone or 2. So we've got 2 iron vows in progress, the most recent of which is Help Cole Rescue the Survivors. Now, we're currently at 3 out of 10 progress on this, even though it seems a lot closer to getting to where we need to be after crossing the spine. So, looking at the Reach a Milestone move, can we mark any progress based on these criteria? Now, we definitely just completed a perilous expedition, so we can definitely mark 1 for that and take us up to 4. And I don't know, like, that doesn't feel significant, does it? Like we've just navigated a stretch of chaotic, incredibly dangerous wild space that, as far as we know, like to our knowledge, no one has ever made it across that bit of space alive. But in terms of the mechanics, that's just 1 progress, and that might just be a slight issue I have with the rules as written, because the expedition was pretty hardcore, but it was part of a vow that was narratively relatively straightforward. And, you know, when we took on that vow, we didn't realize we had to cross that kind of stretch of space. And it kind of feels a bit harsh. But on the flip side, that might not be the game's fault. That might be my pacing, for example. I could have come up with ways to mark progress sooner. And it does say in the rules that there is flexibility in how you approach and mark these milestones. You know, with that in mind, could I just go and mark a couple of boxes for crossing the spine? Could I kind of beef it up in its importance in terms of how much progress I make? My instinct here is actually to say no and just keep it at 1 progress. But also moving down the list, I will mark another 1 for not succumbing to the chaotic forces that dwelled within the spine, because I think that counts as overcoming a significant obstacle. So that takes us up to 5 out of 10, which is halfway there. But kind of in the spirit of what I'm talking about here, what I'm actually going to do to reflect the kind of significance of that expedition across the spine, I'm going to bump the rank of this vow down to dangerous. So even though we are now still only halfway there, we're kind of on the back 9, as it were, because the spine was such a big thing to overcome, this kind of last home leg is going to be just that little bit easier. And I think it feels appropriate, and it's in the spirit of the game, and, well, it's my game, so that's what I'm going to do. So we have another Iron Vow running. It's been running since all the way back in Season 1. And that is find the lens using the iron gates. So this is a big one. It's an extreme vow, I think. And looking again at the reach a milestone move, let's see if we can mark any progress. And I think we can. I think that the whole affair on the Precursor Vault very much counts as progress towards this quest, because that vault held many ancient secrets that are all tied to the Iron Gates, and I think that Archer unwittingly has unlocked a great deal of those secrets, and I think that even if he isn't fully aware of the full kind of ramifications of that discovery, which I can assure you will be made clear at a later date, I think that in being able to actually activate the vault as a gate, guided by these visions he was having, definitely counts as gaining meaningful insight. So we will mark a progress for that. So that takes us up to 4 out of 10. And even though we did complete that perilous expedition, and with the spine and all that, that actually wasn't part of this vow. That is not in service to kind of completing this quest. So I think that might be it, and we'll leave it at just 4 out of 10. Anything else I feel would be unearned, I think. And finally, the big one, the background vow. So, as you can see, we are pretty much running away with this one at 2 out of 10. So close to completing it, I can almost taste it. And this one is kind of pretty closely tied to the other vow, the one about finding the lens. So I think that very same knowledge that we gained on the vault probably counts as progress this one. So let's mark a whole tick, taking this up to 2 1/4 boxes out of 10. So there was a few of you who, and yeah, more than I thought there would be, who thought that the grub that the crew met drinking in the bar at the end of the last episode was going to be Professor Darwin. So yeah, I mean, looking at this track, we are quite some way off off that stage of the quest, my friends. Unless you want me to roll to fulfill this vow with just 2 1/4 boxes filled. I don't know. It feels a bit risky, so I don't know. I mean, I've had worse ideas. But yeah, that might be a way off. I just kind of tell you that now. And I think that brings us up to date. And I should add, and this is something I've been meaning to talk about for a while, that this sort of kind of checking in on your campaign and your progress is part of a suite of moves that are actually in the book called session moves. Now I don't tend to use these because of my episode structure, basically, and the fact that I like to leave things hanging at the conclusion of each episode for the benefit of suspense and drama. So often it's not fitting to kind of just stop and kind of talk about the mechanics of the game, but what I've just done here, going through and marking progress and kind of checking in on where the overall story goes, is kind of part of what you do when you make the end a session move. Now, these session moves are great ways to kind of like decompress and also check in with your table if you're playing with other people, and also to kind of just keep track of things if you're playing on your own. And I would heartily recommend that you use them in your games, even though I've not been using them as written due to how I put the show together. So what I'm saying is do what I say and not what I do. So use these moves, kids. They are great. So one last little piece of housekeeping to attend to is that we have earned a level up. We have some sweet XP burning a hole in my pocket. It's 3 XP we have to spend. And when we spend XP, we make the advance move, which says when you develop your abilities, improve your resources, gain a reward, or boost your influence, you may spend 3 experience to add a new asset or 2 experience to upgrade an asset. So, what should we do? Because we can afford a new asset if we wanted to, a new path, a new module for the ship, or a support vehicle, or a new companion. We have a lot of narrative options to kind of fit in here because you have to tie it to the narrative. I can't just suddenly download a new skill into my brain like it's the Matrix, and you can't just kind of magic an upgrade out of the ether. Like, it has to make narrative sense. So 3 XP for a new asset or 2 XP to upgrade an existing one. Now we're in a deep space station that's kind of full of scrap, and we're going to have to spend some time patching up the Eclipse, which, if you remember, has seen better days. It is on its last legs, bless it. So as part of those repairs, we could upgrade the ship, or, you know, give it a new module maybe. That would not be out of the realms of possibility. Or maybe from this station we could salvage a support vehicle and kind of have it installed on the Eclipse, like a little swoop bike or a rover or something. Or we could make one of the drakes an official companion. Should I have my own dinosaur to ride around on? That would be fun and is very tempting. Or are there any new paths we can take? Narratively, and I've kind of said this before, I'm very interested in how the fugitive asset works. And there are certainly people looking for us, so that would fit very nicely. Or maybe I could just spend 2 XP and upgrade something like my explorer or my scavenger assets maybe. Or I could upgrade the eclipse. Or I could upgrade Griff, although that does feel silly. I should probably never upgrade Griff. I feel like his faulty nature is kind of part of his unique charm, I think. So having thought about it, I think what I'm actually going to do is upgrade Luna's sidekick asset. And I think I'm going to take the last upgrade, which says, when your sidekick acts to get you out of a tough spot, you may face danger or react fire and roll plus their health instead of your own stat. On a hit, take +1 momentum. And I think that feels appropriate to what Luna means to Archer and is a pretty accurate distillation of their relationship. She can now mechanically bail him out of trouble, and that trouble is something that she narratively has probably gotten him into. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. Let's get to the episode proper. And speaking of Luna, it's been 2 days. 2 days since the eclipse emerged from the dust of the spine and limped into the hangar. 2 days of not fearing for their lives at every turn. 2 days of decompression, and dare I say it, rest. Purgatory is not exactly what you'd call a 5-star spa resort, but to Luna, it will do just fine. There is quote-unquote food, a bed, and hot showers. And that's where we find her now, eyes closed, finding a moment of peace as the warm jets of clean water cascade over her face and run through her green and blue streaked hair. She longed for a life of adventure away from the line in Rust's grim factories, and so far the life of a stowaway on the Eclipse has lived up to and surpassed that. But for now, in this moment, she's perfectly happy, right here. In the hangar, Cole is searching through the mountains of scrap as his crew busily work on the Eclipse, welding and patching up the damage, but also taking the time to fine-tune what isn't broken. This place, neglected as it is a gold mine of spare parts and useful things. And it just doesn't make sense to him that it's been left this way. But for now, he continues his search for the right piece of the mechanical puzzle that is getting the Eclipse back in the air. And that is a nice distraction after the events of the last week. And that relief is shared. He is heartened to hear his crew laughing and joking between themselves as they work. Perhaps they too can sense they are getting closer, getting nearer to reuniting with the others. But he also knows that even though they've been gone from this sector for a few years, for everyone else, it's been decades. And Blake Sutton's comments about how lawless and dangerous this place has become has him worried about what might stand between them and their goal. Archer Barlow stands leaning against the frame of the grime-streaked window up on the observation deck. He hasn't slept all that well, and hasn't had much of an appetite either. He is troubled, which right now manifests itself in his long vigil stood at the window, watching a medium-sized cargo hauler some way off in the distance. It isn't moving. It hasn't moved for several hours. And Archer knows this because he has been stood here the whole time, watching it do nothing. Luna, hair still wet from her shower and in relatively fresh, relatively clean clothes, approaches down the corridor behind him with 2 cups of coffee. She hands one to Archer, who takes it, not breaking his gaze. She sips the other as she leans on the opposite side of the smallish window and joins him in looking at the ship in the distance. And she finally breaks the silence. Are you going to tell me what's eating you? Or should I take a guess? Archer sips his coffee. It tastes like shit, but it's better than nothing. He says, "It's this place. Have you paid for anything since we've been here? Been asked for anything in return for what we've received?" Luna shakes her head. Archer continues, "Have you been asked anything at all? Have you seen any other ships enter the hangar? You think, from the state of that place, any ships have docked here in the last decade?" Luna says, "Probably not. What's your point?" And Archer says, "There." And he jabs his finger against the glass, and Luna strains to look at what he's pointing at. And through the dirty window, she can see the engines flare on a small ship, a little landing craft, maybe big enough for 1 or 2 people at a push. And it streaks its way across the space between them and the large hauler in the distance. And the smaller craft emerged from somewhere below them, somewhere Luna is trying but failing to see, no matter how she positions herself in the window. And Archer says, "Ships arrive, but they don't dock. They just sit out there waiting. After a few hours, a smaller shuttle or lander is dispatched, arrives and docks somewhere else on this station, but I can't figure out where. After about 20 or 30 minutes, the smaller ship leaves and rejoins the bigger ship." And they watch as the hauler in the distance begins to glow red and orange, as the lights of the drift envelop it briefly before it jumps, leaving a streak of crackling yellow sparks in its wake. And Archer says, "And then they jump." And Luna's kind of looking at him and kind of lets out a frustrated sigh of her own and says, "Okay, it's sketchy. I get it. But this is the Forge. You ever been anywhere that isn't sketchy? So I'll ask again, what's your point?" And Archer says, "It's not just that it's sketchy. This place doesn't make sense. Not just this station, the whole sector. We're out here in the middle of nowhere, on the fringe of a vast stretch of impassable wild space. There is nothing here. It's hard to imagine somewhere as remote and devoid of life." And then there's another dim orange glow in the distance. And after a second, another large ship, this time a transport vessel, drops out of the drift. And Archer says, "But yet, it seems to be an awfully popular destination. What is this place?" And Luna watches again as a small landing craft is dispatched from the larger ship and heads towards the station, disappearing somewhere below them. She says, "Let me guess. We're not leaving until you find out." And Archer says, "We are not." And Luna says, "That curiosity of yours is going to get you into trouble, you know." And he says, "Probably." And Luna says, "You don't seem too worried about that." And he turns and looks at her for the first time and says, "I'm not. I have you." And I think that little acknowledgement, actually saying it out loud, I think that's a nice little narrative capper to the upgrade that we've just given Luna. So that's the kind of mechanics of that tied to the narrative. So we are going to figure out what's going on here, because even though some of us know, the people who've watched the live stream might have an idea of what's going on here, Archer and the others, they don't know at all, so they need to figure that out. But I think first, what we need to do is another move that's going to represent what has been going on here in the past few days, and I think we're going to make the Sojourn move, which says when you spend time recovering within a community role, plus heart. Now, even though we've not really been welcomed as part of a community, we've just been kind of left to our own devices and have been allowed to pretty much take what we want and kind of relax to our kind of leisure, I guess. Because even though it's pretty much a kind of an abandoned station filled with junk, we have found some respite here. So let's make the Sojourn move rolling plus heart. A weak hit. Even though I don't think I would actually burn my momentum for this, the 9 means that it's kind of useless in this situation anyway. So we will have to settle for a weak hit. And a weak hit says, this is a safe refuge, but time is short and resources are strained. You and your allies each make 1 recover move instead of 2, with no more than 3 moves among the group. So we're actually kind of okay on the health front. So on a Sojourn, like if you roll a strong hit, you get to make 3 of the recover moves, like heal, hearten, repair, resupply, whatever. And on a weak hit, we're just going to make 1 of those. So what we're going to pick is, let's have a look. We're kind of okay on the health front. We're pretty average on supply. We are a little low on spirit, but our real priority here, I guess, is the eclipse, which is busted up pretty bad. So that should be our focus. And it kind of makes sense because even though we're safe here and there is food and there is kind of stuff, it is still a pretty miserable place. You wouldn't want to stay here much longer than they already have, because that would probably grind your spirit into dust and also have a pretty negative effect on your health, because whilst there is food, I think that rickets and or scurvy are probably both real threats here, because in terms of nutritional enrichment, I would say this place is not great. So we get to make 1 of the recover moves and take an automatic strong hit. So we're going to do that with repair. And we don't have to roll. So a strong hit gives us 5 repair points to spend. And we're in a facility, which is more than we need. The 5 points are more than what we need to allow us to take the eclipse back up to full integrity, to 5 out of 5. And I think that's reflective of the time and effort that everyone, mainly Cole and his crew, have put in. And also the fact that the hangar is kind of so suspiciously well stocked with parts and equipment, old and abandoned as it may be. So that's what we've mainly been doing for 2 days, and assisted by kind of uninterrupted working and the veritable bounty of scraps and spare parts that we found in the hangar. We've been able to turn the Eclipse into what was an absolute wreck into something resembling its former self. Oh, and also one thing we did, which I kind of played out a little bit on the live stream, is we went to see Purgatory's astrolabe, and what we did was we gave her our navigational data of crossing the spine, which obviously is very precious data, and in return she gave us a completed sector map of the Delphian Flux, or an as complete sector map of the Delphian Flux as you could possibly wish for. And yeah, I've kind of talked about it a little bit, so here it is. I kind of started this on the live stream, and I've added to it and developed it since. And once again, I've been using Nick Borton's wonderful Stargazer app, and I will be using this a lot going forward. Can't believe it's taken me so long to actually start using this thing, because it's amazing. So get used to seeing it in action, and if you want to use it yourself, you'll find a link in the description below. So what have we got? So this is the Delphian Flux. And at the centre, we have the smouldering red star Megrez and 3 planets. Nearest us, we have the tainted world of Zant and an orbital settlement called Beacon. And over here, we have an ice world called Canna, on which there is a settlement known as Wellspring. And on the far side of the sector, we have the rocky mining planet of Silex, which is where Cole and his troops were posted all those years ago, guarding the facilities from the clans. And the peacekeeping organisation Cole was part of, which we now know are called the Paragons, which are, I should say, not to be confused with magic users called Paragons, which if you choose another truth in your campaign prep, that's what they're called. They were based in this deep space station over here called Paragon 6. And we know from what Cole has told us that the Iron Gate they got pulled through when they were answering that distress call must be somewhere up in this part of the sector here. Now, Archer and Cole will have pored over this sector map, and Cole will have been able to kind of fill in some details that are on here to Archer. And I think he probably confirms that, yeah, he was based at Paragon 6 and they were deployed on Silex. But even though he spent some time here and knows the sector pretty well, the settlements of Beacon and Wellspring are both new to him. And he also has no idea of the existence of Purgatory, but that is understandable. And that is all they, as characters, know. Like I said, we know a bit more. Although I should warn you to not get too attached to some of the details we rolled up in the live stream, because they may or may not have changed. So that aside, what are Archer and Luna doing in their attempt to find out what this station really is? What is going on here? There is something going on here, but they just don't know what it is. So how would they figure that out? I think Archer's curiosity would be asking the main question of, where are these landing craft actually going? They're not going in the hangar. So where else are they going? Where are they docking? They pass out of view and they have to go somewhere. And I think Archer's obviously going to guess that there's somewhere below the station, something they didn't see when they arrived, somewhere discreet for a small craft to dock. And I think the only way that they can check that without actually getting out and having a look is to maybe try and access some plans of the station, like a schematic maybe. See if the layout confirms that suspicion. So I think we join Archer and Luna as they are standing at an old terminal that's built into the wall of the corridor that shoots off the observation deck where they've been watching the ships. And it's like most things here, it's barely functional. There's this kind of ancient, small, square screen that's kind of caked with muck and grime, and there's a kind of a small keypad with big, chunky plastic buttons with all the letters have long since worn away. But there is power running to it. It's definitely still working. And Archer has removed a section of the console, kind of exposing the wiring inside. And he has his data pad in his hand, and he has a set of these leads running off it, kind of with these little crocodile clamps that are kind of attached to some of the wires inside. And he's going to good old-fashioned hack his way in and try and find the information he needs, whilst Luna keeps watch. Even though there's literally like no one around, no one actually cares. I think even if some grubs or spacers found them doing it, they'd probably just kind of keep their heads down and walk on. So I think this is going to be a straight gather information roll as we try and uncover the true layout of this place. So let's have a look at the move. Gather information says when you search for clues, conduct an investigation or analyze evidence, roll plus wits. So we're looking for something on the system that will tell us the true layout of this place. So let's gather information, rolling plus wits. Another weak hit, and again, I don't actually think that's worth burning our momentum for. So on a weak hit, the information provides new insight, but also complicates your quest. Envision what you discover, then take +1 momentum. So we are now up to maximum momentum, which I really must use at some point, because, you know, I do like to keep it for when it's really, really needed, but you know, other times I think I do let it drift a little bit because it is quite easy to build back up. So anyway, we need to envision what we learn. So Archer kind of punches a few keys on his data pad and waits as the console monitor slowly starts to kind of glow this weak kind of yellow. And he wipes the screen with his sleeve to make it a little easier to read, and punches something into the console buttons itself, and after a moment, the screen fills with this basic schematic of Purgatory Station. And he navigates it using his pad, kind of scrolling the image up and down, and until he sees what appears to be several floors extending down below where they are stood now. When they arrived, at first glance, this station appeared to be a fairly squat, shallow, round structure, but this schematic suggests the station extends downwards into 3 structures, each smaller than the last. And Archer's kind of poring over this information. With a furrowed brow, he says, "There's clearly a dock here. and a whole other complex underneath where we are now. And it's all connected by a... And he turns, and as there's this kind of loud metallic clang, and kind of sees Luna stood further down the corridor, and there's an access panel at her feet and a hole in the wall in front of her. And she says, "A secret staircase?" And Archer joins her, and they both put their heads in the hole, and Archer shines a light down to show that indeed, yes, there is a spiral staircase running down, accessible from somewhere else somehow. Although Luna has managed to kind of muscle her way in by removing the access panel. And the staircase goes up as well, but according to the schematic, there's not anything extra up there, so Archer's less concerned with that one. And Luna says, "Shall we?" And I think we'll cut to them slowly making their way down this staircase kind of cautiously. And it's like narrow metal spiral staircase that leads down into the dark. And even though it's dark, they can tell instantly that it is noticeably more well maintained. It's noticeably cleaner than the main area. And the air just kind of seems clearer and cleaner somehow. And they go down one floor, where to the left there is a small grated platform to step off onto that leads to a set of heavy doors, and that pattern is repeated on the 2 floors below. Archer steps off onto the platform and Luna joins him. There are controls to operate the door, but as Archer reaches for them, the doors slide open of their own accord. And they step out into a corridor that runs in 2 directions, in what Archer thinks and knows from the schematic is a perfect circle. On the wall in front of them are windows running the length of the entire wall. In both directions there are doors at regular intervals. The ceilings are low and the corridor is very well lit, and in stark contrast to the station above, it is also impeccably clean. The floor has been polished to a high sheen, and the pale beige and white walls are spotless. Archer catches the pair of them's reflection in the windows opposite, and kind of they just instantly make the place look dirtier, even though they're kind of, relatively cleaned up. He slowly approaches the glass. The windows look down onto the floors below, and he can make out that there's a gantry running around the length of the floor below where they are now, and below that, all the way down at the bottom, he can just about make out a small circular room that's filled with flashing lights. But it's pretty dimly lit down there. To get a better look, they are going to have to move a little closer. So they disappear through the doors again and head down the spiral staircase 1 more floor. And they exit through the next set of doors on the floor, find themselves on the metal gantry that runs in a circle around the room. Looking up, they can see the glass windows above where they just were, and below they can get a much better look into the room at the bottom of this structure. Once again, this room is impeccably clean. Lining the walls are banks and banks of complicated-looking, incredibly high-tech machinery, computers and powerful processing units, consoles with monitors displaying all sorts of information. There are 2 semicircular desks on either side of the room, behind which sit a pair of people studying monitors and busily typing on keyboards. They wear headsets and serious expressions, never once looking up or away from their screens. And in the centre of the room stands another person. Let's roll up some details. First, some pronouns. 17 is he, him. And a first look. 76 is slight. And 40 is graceful. Okay. So there is a man standing in the middle of the room. He's thin, not much to him, and that's easy to tell from here because he wears a tight-fitting grey suit, the single-breasted jacket buttoned all the way up to the neck. He has tan skin and dark brown eyes behind a pair of delicate, round eyeglasses. His hair is short, dark, and neat, and he stands patiently waiting, hands behind his back. Archer notices he is standing to the side of a circular pattern on the floor, which becomes more pronounced as it lights up with a red outline. And as it does, 4 guards, uniformed in grey jumpsuits and lightweight black combat armour, each armed with carbine blasters, step out from the shadows. The circular pattern on the floor begins to move, and like an aperture, it opens, revealing a small platform being pushed up into the room. The security guards look alert as a person wearing a heavy environmental suit is lifted into the room through the floor. The person has their hands in the air and wears a black blindfold, obscuring most of their face. In their right hand, they hold a metal flask. Something is said by a guard that Archer can't quite hear, but it makes the blindfolded person hold out the flask whilst keeping their other hand in the air, and they are visibly shaking nervously. The guards raise their blasters, and one of them moves in, taking the flask from the blindfolded person, who then puts their now empty hand up in the air to join the other. The guard takes the flask over to one of the desks and unscrews the lid, and they carefully pour what looks like a steady trickle of clear liquid into a small test tube, which they then put into a centrifuge-type machine. It spins into action, and the guard silently examines some information that is being displayed on the readout to the side. After taking in all the information they need, they nod with apparent satisfaction to the man in the centre of the room, who in turn nods to one of the people sat at the desk, who reaches down and brings up something small and shiny. And Archer strains to see what it is, but to him it looks like a disc, something that is commonly used for sharing data or information. The guard takes the disc and puts it into the blindfolded person's hand, closing their fingers around it forcefully. They say something to them up close, which doesn't appear to ease their nervousness. And then, with another nod, the platform descends into the floor, the aperture closes, and they're gone. And Archer and Luna kind of share this look of visible confusion of what they've just seen unfold, because that was very strange indeed. But we rolled a weak hit, didn't we, on our gather information, so I guess we need to complicate our quest, don't we? The confused silence between Archer and Luna is broken by the man down below, who says, "Would you care to join us?" And that's when Archer and Luna become aware that they have been flanked on either side by armed guards, who motion for them to move down the stairs with the barrels of their guns. Holding their hands aloft in surrender, they have their weapons taken and are marched at gunpoint down the stairs into the room below. Archer hasn't seen this sort of technology outside of the Terminus, outside of the Griffin Institute. And Luna hasn't seen anything like this ever. This is cutting-edge technology, high-powered equipment. Whatever this place does, it must be important. And the armed guards seem to emphasize that point. After a moment, the man says, "So, our mysterious guests decide to finally join us. Tell me, where did you come in from?" And Archer says, "We crossed the spine." And the man smiles and kind of tilts his head in this kind of like quiet, incredulous way and says, "Of course." And Luna says, "It's true." And the man says, "Tell me, mysterious guests who crossed the spine, who sent you? I strongly advise you think carefully about your answer. I have limited reserves of both time and patience, and no use for the dishonest." And Archer says, no one sent us. We did cross the spine. We stopped here to patch up our ship. And the man says, well, you appear to have become somewhat lost. And Archer says, the repairs have taken a while. And what can I say? I got curious. And the man says, a dangerous impulse. And Luna says, I keep telling him that. And the man approaches and begins to circle them, kind of walking around them, almost as if he's inspecting them, looking them over. And he has this very strange energy. It's kind of like unnerving. He notices the faded Griffin Institute logo on the back of Archer's jacket and says, you are lost. And then he runs his fingers along the hem of Luna's poncho, her grey clan Kraken poncho, and says, what a curious pair you are. And then one of the guards approaches and whispers something into the man's ear, which seems to shock or surprise him. It kind of takes him a good minute to process what the guard has just told him. And he turns to them and says, so, our mysterious guests really did cross the spine of Kronos. And Archer remembers the astrolabe, of course. He gave her the route across the spine, and that's what this man has just been told. But Archer is kind of getting frustrated and says, look, what is this place? And the man says, you really don't know, do you? And Luna says, and let me guess, if you told us, you'd have to kill us. And the man says, to the contrary, I'm as happy to tell you as I am to kill you. You are standing in the cradle, the birthplace of the algorithm. And Luna's like, the fuck are you talking about? And the man, just ignoring her, just says, no one moves in or out of the flux without my say-so. To run the blockades, you need the algorithm. And to access the algorithm, you come here, to the cradle, to me. And Archer looks incredibly confused, and the man gives him another one of those kind of soft, smiling, incredulous looks and moves towards him and says, you navigated the spine of Kronos in an Outbounder-class vessel, an old Outbounder-class vessel at that, to reach the flux, a sector you know next to nothing about? And Archer says, sounds about right. And the man reaches one of his slender, delicate fingers into the open neck of Archer's shirt, pulling out the chain at the end of which the professor's black iron compass hangs. And the man says, you know, I think I might have a use for you after all. Thank you a million times. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe if you've not done so already, and click the little bell icon so you can be notified as soon as the next video drops. And please do check out the Bad Spot Patreon, where you can find all kinds of cool perks and really support the work I'm doing. I'll be back next week, but until then, it's farewell and safe passage.